There's so much evidence against evolution as it was drawn up by Darwin. I think he even had doubts himself as the story goes, and we know his associate
We
did.
know that birds were dinosaurs,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Birds didn't grow into dinosaurs. Dinosaurs became birds.
Yes,
you know.
yes. I mean, there's so much evidence just on a genetic level alone, so we won't even debate any of that. Let's talk about what happened. Charles Doolittle Walcott, where did he come in, and what was his influence on archaeology and such then?
He just picked up the same policies and reinforced them and made them the official policy of the 20th century. So it carried over again, and it's carried over to the present day. And they all hold ranks with each other and enforce the party line.
And it also, there's a giggle factor that is kept solidly in place. Again, we were talking off camera about the fact, once you have your academic institutions and your religious and your media, religious institutions, media and such that are all essentially conspiring to give us a reflection of humanity that is very small, very limited, without
don't want
texture.
us thinking big.
They don't want us thinking big.
They don't want us being proud.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want great anything.
Right. And yet, when you start looking at the evidence of what you've come across, I mean, I had looked into some of this many years ago as well, probably about the same time when you first started doing this research. And I remember finding it so interesting, these obscure little articles from Ohio, and especially in the Midwest, from the late 1800s, where someone would be digging around in their garden and stumble across a massive femur of some kind. And again, that has
They were
been completely
dismissed
obscured.
as hoaxes,
Yes,
animal bones.
exactly.
But in the 19th century, amazing quote that I used in the beginning of the book from Abraham Lincoln, who was making a speech at Niagara Falls in 1848. And he said, "The eyes of that extinct species of giant, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now." So it shows you just how widespread the knowledge of the giants was in the 19th century. Now, the interesting thing about that is he gave that speech unknowingly at the site of a giant city that was up in that area, where they found numerous 7 to 9 foot giants. Then a little south of there in Cayuga Township was what was called the Cemetery of Giants, where they found 200 giant skeletons 7 to 9 feet tall. A little farther down the state, they found 150 7 to 9 footers. Pennsylvania, and more, and all the way out to Catalina Island. And Catalina Island is in the 1920s this happened. International News front page Sunday supplement feature articles. 3,781 skeletons dug up by the Catalina Museum. Dr. Ralph Glidden headed the digs. 7 to 9 feet tall, 9'2" king, and a megalithic era Stone Age temple.
Yes.
And within 10 years, not only was all of those exhibits shut down, but all references to this stuff was scrubbed.
I just find it such an amazing conspiracy.
And then they call him a crackpot.
Yeah, a crackpot.
He was the curator of the museum, and he headed the Hay Foundation, which was officially part of the Smithsonian.
Yes.
And in the book, I show that the Smithsonian has 536 negatives from those digs, and we're trying right now to get the Smithsonian to come forward and show what those images are. And it'll be very interesting.
Absolutely. What piqued my curiosity about 15 years ago is I'd stumbled across the story about the cache of Egyptian artifacts that were in the Grand Canyon. And I remember going to a lecture of a man who, he was an archaeologist. He also did his own digs. Not only was he showing the location of that particular cave in which those artifacts It's on the side of a very steep drop-off. This is not an easy place to get into. So it makes you wonder first, A, how did that stuff get in there? You have to start looking at other means of transportation to fly that kind of cache of a sizable amount of Egyptian artifacts in there. And the Smithsonian, then, the article made it to the Phoenix Sun back in what, 1910?
Huge, yeah, huge article.
Huge article. The Smithsonian comes in, it's all covered up.
We don't know who these people are.
We don't know who they are. They've spirited everything away. And so this man had been in the cave. He had seen it, and he said it's very, very difficult to access.
Well, and the legends in the area say that the entrance of the Sipapu, which was where the Indians went to survive the apocalypse with the ant people.
ant people.
The ant people, and everyone thinks they're talking about ants. I think they're talking about the survivors of Atlantis, A-N-T. And in the book also you have the sons of Anak, which is in the book of Numbers, where they say we came into this strange land inhabited by giants, before whom we stood like grasshoppers. And you just find the myths over and over again reinforcing the same themes with the same root words, you know, with the same associations. By extension, in Death Valley, they found a similar underground temple in 50 connecting caves, 8 to 9 foot giants dressed in what they called sheepskin-looking zoot suits.
We're going to get to that. I just find this so fascinating. And the same man that was talking about the cave in the Grand Canyon that had stored at one time the Egyptian artifacts before the Smithsonian came in and spirited everything away, he had also come across these clay tubes that were burial tubes. And this man, you and I were talking on camera, I cannot remember his name.
I was fascinated.
He agreed to do an interview with me, and then he said he's had so much harassment.
Now those were standing
out.
burials, correct?
They were standing burials, and these beings were anywhere between 9 and 15 feet tall. They had their clothing on, and I saw the images of them. They had hair, very red hair, bright orangish red hair, and as you're going to tell us in a little bit, a lot of these skeletons have blonde, waist-length black hair, red hair.
Correct.
That's still intact.
Catalina was blonde, red hair all over the country, including Florida. Black hair often. Again, I'm not saying that all the population of the Americas was Caucasian or giants, but the main central burials in the majority of the major mounds across America, and again, you have to understand, hundreds of thousands of mounds in the Americas. The Smithsonian themselves estimated over 150,000 mounds in the East Coast alone. People don't think there's any mounds out west. Well, out west is covered with mounds.
Yes.
There was Lake Lohanton, which was at 5,000 feet in the California, Nevada, Arizona border. It was big as the Great Lakes. That's where Spirit Cave, Lovelock Cave has been found. It's in association with the temple complexes in Death Valley and the Grand Canyon, and the finds all the way through California.
Okay, now in ancient lore, and certainly about Atlantean times, it's often discussed that the people were very large in stature. And so if there were these confluences historically of events that were occurring, if you were having events that required having to leave a given area and migrate to other places, certainly it's not beyond reason that we could expect to see these same people, these same types of beings arriving in the Americas. I don't know why we think, because we've been given such a virginal history, except for a few savages.
Christian history,
ridiculous.
you know, everything came out of the Mideast, you know, and but magically these cultures, Egyptian and Sumerian, that appeared in the Mideast, appeared at their highest form of culture and then degenerated.
Exactly.
And when you ask them, well, how is this possible? They say, well, you know, the history, you know, things like that happen. Well, no, they don't.
No, they don't.
You know,
they don't. That's devolution.
These were clearly civilizations brought in at a high level from somewhere else.
Right. Okay, now, just to get a perspective here, we're going to go to Robert Wadlow.
Okay.
And I think many people have probably seen some of his photos if they've ever looked into the subject of giants, but we have a little
Largest
video.
modern man.
Largest modern man. So let's take a look at a little video we have of him, and then we'll discuss this a little further.
Making ends feet is certainly a big job when it takes size 39 shoes to fit them. 2 into 1 do go. Here's the owner, Robert Wadlow of Chicago, who at the ripe old age of 17 stands 8 feet 4 inches in his socks, and incidentally seems to be quite beyond the reach of young women. Every time young Robert goes through a doorway, he scores a duck. And this is Robert's father, a mere dwarf of 6 feet.
And we have a few other family photos of him while we talk about him.
He was 8'4" in that. He made it to 8'11", but he only lived to be 22. He suffered from a pituitary condition. He had a tumor in his pituitary gland.
Yes.
Now, the giants that we found in the mounds are clearly not suffering from gigantism, as they call it.
Right. And this man, just as a matter of scale, as we can see here, he's 8'4". We're talking about giants, the rulers in particular, who ranged between 9 and 12 feet tall. just as a matter of scale. And I want to bring up something. Do you know who Klaus Donna is by any
Oh, yes,
chance?
very well,
Okay,
yeah.
so he's a friend of mine, and I've gotten to know him through
Amazing
our work.
stuff, yeah.
Amazing stuff. And in one of the interviews I did with him, I was at his apartment in Austria. I believe we were in Austria, and he handed me the occipital bone of a person, and this had gone through university examination and so forth, that they determined to be between 23 and 25 feet tall.
Right.
Now, again,
There's a whole other
Robert
class of
is
findings.
9 feet tall max in what we just saw
Yeah.
there. So you have to look at what's going on. And I want to bring up something we talked about briefly off camera too, the pituitary. So he had a pituitary tumor that created this gigantism, right? But we know when you go into the ancient studies, the classic ancient studies, the pituitary is responsible for
It's a central
growth,
spiritual,
our
but
spiritual
it also was
evolution,
considered
all
the
of
most
it.
important gland in general by the ancients. So,
Exactly. And so what
yeah.
was going on there? Is it possible that this devolution, the tiny stature we have now, is really more a process of having a negatively impacted pituitary?
I agree. Yeah. My personal opinion, is that when you take out diet and nutrition, which is why they always say, oh, we're getting bigger and stuff. I mean, when you go back into a really ancient culture with high spiritual practices, with it's even conceivable stimulation of the pituitary.
Exactly.
Could have resulted in some of this growth.
Yeah, exactly. It's just something worth thinking about, because our assumptions are so backward in what the human species
And
is
so
to begin with,
and so
restricted. Okay, so one of the things that we were talking about is the leaders in these mounds were usually between 7 and 9 feet tall. So he would have been a normal. Robert would have been a rather average-looking sized
Right.
fellow from that time. But also there was a fineness of features, of strength, real broadness, their broad shoulders. These were fully, it wasn't gigantism, these were fully intact, very
fully
powerful human
articulated
beings.
by all means. It looks like beautiful looking people. The picture of the queen, the 8-foot queen,
Oh, yes.
bedecked in her copper finery.
Yes.
I mean, that's a fine physical specimen.
So here you have these people between, here she is. So this is the queen who was, how tall was she?
She was 8 foot. Her king consort, who was buried on top of her, was 9 foot 2.
And let's talk about, now all these little dots you see are very intricately stranded pearls.
Correct. Freshwater pearls, especially in Ohio. The finds of the giant mound burials in Ohio, in some cases over 500,000 freshwater pearls. Often the mouths are stuffed with the pearls. And this is in association with the copper and mica jewelry, the crowns. And again, people say, well, why do you say they ruled? Well, because they're buried in the middle of the mound and they're
Right.
wearing a copper crown.
Crown.
It's a tip-off.
And also, again, the copper crown, the crown and any other jewels that are associated with crowns have directly to do with the pituitary gland. They always did historically.
Interesting. I didn't know
So, yeah. And so this woman was buried with the king, and let's talk about the position they were buried in.
Well, the thing about the mound builder burials is there a wide range of burial types. In this case, they were buried in unison with each other in what might be called a cosmic embrace. Sometimes you have couples with their knees intertwined, sitting, facing each other. In 2 cases, holding stela with hieroglyphs. And then you get a number of standing burials, sometimes surrounded by standing stones. Then there's something called sun circle burials, where it'll be a group of 8, 10, 12 individuals all facing in, and then the king usually in a standing position in the middle. So just an incredible variety. And again, when people talk about hoaxes and stuff, what I always say, and I try to include in the book, was the associated burial positions and the associated grave goods. Now, you might be able to fake a giant bone here or there, but we're talking about detailed grave goods, high degrees of pottery.
Let's talk about that. I mean, some of the art that has been found is it's exquisite. We don't do any finer artwork today. I mean, almost as though it's been machined.
Yeah.
Because of the evenness and smoothness of texture, the fineness of the features. And again, in association with these giants. Just explain some of the pieces that you've come across. Look at this beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that's considered one of the finest pieces of pottery discovered in the Americas, and you can just see the almost machine quality to it. And in association with the Catalina finds, there was a 65-pound urn which they found in the burial site, and everyone commented that it seemed to have been machined. It was of such high quality. And this doesn't just apply to pottery, it goes right across the board into accounts of dams, irrigation systems, pipes alone that come out of the mounds. The majority of the ones in the book are from West Virginia, where in 1883 I found the Smithsonian's own field report, which said they found 3 giants. This is very famous, came out of Iowa. A lot of controversy at the time as to whether it was an elephant or a mammoth. The people that were trying to be conservative were saying it was an elephant. Of course, there's no history of elephants in the Americas either, so. But people that know anatomy seem to think it's a mammoth, in which case this degree of accuracy would have had to have been observed 10 or 20,000 years ago.
And this degree of artistry.
Yeah. The artistry of the pipes and carvings was one of the things that really just blew me away. Because these things are being found in association with the giant burials and associated burials that aren't giants. You know? But the degree of sophistication and artistry across the board much higher than what was associated with the later American Indians. And if you ask the American Indians, again, they say, you know, this is from a prior culture.
Let's talk about some of the other finery, because they had sophisticated jewelry as well. Copper seemed to be the medium that was used the most, and as you say, the freshwater pearls, wherever they found them.
And mica.
And mica, and mica. And so there was a lot of beautiful jewelry that was associated, but also one thing I found intriguing, going to the Louvre and also the British Museum on Egyptology, is the games, the sophisticated board games and such that existed, and children's games that existed. So those same accoutrements were found in these American mounds. What are some of the other things that were found by way of fabric, for example? Because you talked about these zoot suits.
Well, there's 2 incredible things out west. One is the finds in the Death Valley Caves, where they go into detail about these sheepskin-looking zoot suits that were, you know, apparently tailored pants and coats and buttons. And in that case, there was a series of connected temple rooms. It all led to what they characterized as almost looking like a museum, where they had niches with the bones of saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths, mammoths, and dinosaurs.
Saber-toothed tigers.
Right, and dinosaurs. Now, people say, okay, well, this is ridiculous, but let me just make this one point. The Ica stones in South America also showed giants, and there's cave petroglyphs in Nevada that show dinosaurs. Now, I know this seems crazy, but in the last 10 years, scientists in Germany and at North Carolina State both began independently cutting open giant bones, which has never been done before because they were considered too valuable. And they found soft tissue within these dinosaur bones that's been dated to 20 to 36,000 BC. And these there was a huge scientific conference in Singapore where they presented these findings. The woman at North Carolina State has been under attack for the last 10 years over all this.
Interesting. But
I'm just putting it out there.
Yes.
The other amazing thing about fabrics was found in Spirit Cave out in Nevada, which is associated with Lake Lahontan again. And they were excavating bat guano out of there. And under several feet, they started to discover what looked like human remains. And they had to contact the University of Nevada, and archaeologists came out, took a look at it. What they found was 3 skeletons mummified and wrapped in very fine tule fiber fabric, like Egyptian thread count. It was that advanced. They asked, this was in the 1940s, they looked at the stuff, they said, well, it appears to be 500,000 years old, and immediately filed it away. In the late 90s...
Just a casual comment, 500,000 years old.
No, 500.
Oh, 500 to
1,000 years
I thought.
So a scientist at the University of California read about this in the 90s, and he went to Nevada and found the things in storage, pulled them out of storage, and carbon dated them to 7,500 BC. Mummification and advanced weaving. There's a
Yes,
shot of,
yes.
of the shroud in the book.
Yes.
Now, one would think the news of a 7,500-year-old mummified anything anywhere in the world would have been a sensation. No one knows about it.
No. Okay. So fabric. So sophisticated fabric weaving. We know at least that far back.
7,500
years at least.
And associated
Okay.
with the copper finds, I said to myself, where's all the copper coming from? Well, it turns out in northern Michigan, Keweenaw Peninsula, and then by extension into the lake, there's something called Isle Royale, which I find is a very interesting name for it, number one, the Royal Island. And that island is literally made out of copper, and because of a volcanic upthrust, the copper was exposed to the air, all the sulfur impurities burned off. So it's over 99% pure. Two professors in Michigan wrote a book and estimated that 1.5 billion pounds of copper were taken out of there over a period of 10,000 years.
Well, besides the jewelry and such, what other remnants have you found in terms of what the copper was used for?
Well, they can't account for it. They say, well, in the mounds,
That's a lot of jewelry.
we see a lot of jewelry. Yeah. And a lot of independent researchers up in that area have reported petroglyphs of Cretan-looking ships, Egyptian-looking vessels, all the way to the Viking. Now, it's very interesting. The copper trade fell off in 1500 BC and started back up at 900 AD. In 1500 BC, the Santorini volcanic explosion in Crete happened, which, among other things, I think accounts for the Exodus story and completely destroyed that seagoing culture. So it would make sense that the copper trade dropped off. And then it started up at 900 AD, which is exactly the time they say the Vikings showed up.
You were talking about pipes earlier. Were the pipes made of copper?
Mostly soapstone and some very hard other stones.
Were you impressed more with the precision with which these were made?
Yeah. And how it was worked. It's the same story. You get this, a high degree of granite and stuff like that seems to have been easily manipulated and worked on. And science, says they had crude instruments. They didn't know this. They didn't know that. And they do it with the Great Pyramid and the Great Stones of Baalbek and come up with these ridiculous stories in order to make people from the extreme past look like children,
people like you,
ignorant children.
Yes. People like you and Klaus Donna and Christopher Dunn, though, I have such respect for. He's done amazing research in terms of showing that it was virtually impossible for some of those megalithic statues.
Precision.
Yeah, laser-like precision. Obviously, a lot of the statuary in Egypt was machine tooled back in its day. Yeah.
I mean, he's done photos where he's taken like the face of Ramses and shown that you can put the right cheek against the left.
Perfect.
It's perfect.
It's flawless.
Yeah. He says the only way you can do that is with a computer program.
So we're looking at a society, and we've started slowly coming to embrace. Yes, there were in the Middle East maybe some more advanced civilizations, but we haven't gotten to the point, because your work is really relatively new and phenomenal. That the same thing was going on all over the planet.
Right. Well, I joke at one point, especially in light of the finds out west, which we know were 7,500 BC. And by the way, also the Florida bog mummies. And the Florida bog mummy stories is another just mind blower. They were putting in a condominium complex near Disney World in Titusville, which is on the Atlantic coast, and the developers drained a lake there, and they discovered under the peat moss skeletons. So they contacted the University of Florida and Florida State. They came out, started digging in there, and what they discovered was several hundred red-haired, mummified skeletons. The hair was still in a knot, and they'd been ritually buried with stakes. Couldn't get any funding for it at all.
Can you believe that?
So they had to raise independent funds, and the developers on their own dime put up $60,000 worth of machines so they could drain this stuff out. This 10, 15 years. Finally, the University of Florida in the last couple of years has stepped forward by a grant from a private individual who allowed them to do it. Same thing happened on the west coast of Florida. They had health spas over on the west coast, and in the 50s they were very popular, and people would come down on vacation. And one of the guys was an ex-Navy diver, and he started scuba diving and coming up with skeletons. And then the tourists started coming up with skeletons, and he tried to get the government involved. No success at all. And in the case of the west coast, They're actually cenotes. They thought they were only 40 feet deep, and they're shaped like an hourglass, and they come back out, and at the bottom is peat moss, and underneath the peat moss, hundreds of red-haired skeletons, dated 7,500
And the
BC.
red-haired skeletons are all over the country.
Yep. So I joked at one point, because they always say, well, when did the Europeans discover America? And I said, well, maybe you've got it like completely backwards, I said, if you go back to 7,500 BC, especially out west, that was considered the most lush biodiversity existing on the planet. So perhaps we discovered them.
Right.
And they didn't discover us at all.
There are so many question marks that come up when you start looking at all of this. I really don't even know where to go with it. It's just kind of, it's just data. At this point, it's just data. Trying to string it all together seems almost impossible unless you just stick to a particular locale and see that there was a particular very advanced or sophisticated culture of the day. So let's talk about the mounds themselves a little bit, and let's talk about the ways in which the internal structure of the mounds were built, and purpose and ceremony and that sort of thing.
Well, there were several different types of mounds.
Here we have one.
That's Monk's Mound, which is in Cahokia, which is in St. Louis at the confluence of three major rivers, and huge significance to the site. They originally estimate that the city of Cahokia was 50 to 60,000 people. In the last 2 years, the city of St. Louis has been doing extensive work on their sewers and roads, and they've discovered that they're finding Cahokian remains all over underneath St. Louis. They've upped the estimate to 100 to 150,000 people. Now we have...
When were the Cahokian? What is the age estimate on
Cahokia,
that?
again, fell in 1200 to 1500 AD as mound builder culture in general across the country. People ask me, well, what happened? I personally think disease. I also think that the Mongol invasion went not only east but west and came into the Americas and probably brought the Black Plague with it. And so at Cahokia, the site has never been properly studied. The man that was officially assigned to do some tentative digs was also associated in covering up some of the extraordinary finds in Sayre, Pennsylvania, including the horned
Yes,
skull,
I was going to get to that next.
which they squashed. It's the same guy. It's there. Yeah.
Now, okay, like I said,
can't
I don't
remember his
even
name.
know what to do with all of this.
I can't remember the guy's name, but the archaeologist that was involved in this
was
find
in